Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everybody is having a good week, and hopefully we'll have some nice weather this weekend. I'm going to go over a few things today. I'm going to start off with a brief overview of some important sports information. As you probably heard on my last podcast, I had mentioned about the last four teams in the college basketball tournament, what they call March Madness. And I have to admit, I picked the wrong team. I was on a pretty big winning streak for my picks over the last year or so. But I did pick the University of Arizona to be victorious. And they got pretty slammed in the semifinal game against Michigan. It was a very one-sided game. And then the final game came to Michigan against UConn. UConn had won two back-to-back championships in 2023 and 24, and then they got eliminated early last year in 25. And made it back to the finals in this year, which is quite impressive with everything that's going on in college sports, kind of what I call the legalized corruption, where it's the highest bidder gets a lot of the players. Players transfer around a lot more frequently than you or I would get new jobs. So the college basketball and college football are kind of like the Wild Wild West. But be that as it may, the final game was University of Michigan against University of Connecticut. And in a close game that was more of a defensive struggle, I would say, the shooting for both teams was off. The University of Michigan won. So I wanted to give props to the University of Michigan. The last time that they had won the NCAA tournament was in 1989. So this was their first win in 36 years. And, of course, that's a big public institution, so they have a lot of alumni, and so it was a very popular win. Moving on in basketball, the NBA is approaching its final weekend. The regular season will end this Sunday. Some of the slots have been determined, but not all. The Eastern Conference in particular has a dogfight for the playoff slots between 5 and 10. The thing that's certain in the East is the Detroit Pistons will be the first seed for the playoffs. It appears that the Boston Celtics will be the second seed unless something unusual happens this weekend. In the Western Conference, the defending champion Oklahoma Thunder, who have had a tremendous regular season again, are the number one seed, and the San Antonio Spurs are the number 2 seed. They had a very tremendous year, led by their 7'6" phenom Victor Wembanyama. Unfortunately, injuries always play a big part in sports, especially in basketball. And the Los Angeles Lakers, who had been on quite a run over the past couple months, suffered 2 major injuries. Luka Doncic and their other top guard, who I'm drawing a blank on his name, so I apologize for that, but he's their second best player. And Luka Doncic, I would say, at best is questionable for the playoffs to start. And the other player who I mentioned is probably doubtful for a good bit, if not all of the playoffs. So that's really going to put a kink in the Lakers. So unless something miraculously happens for them, they will probably be eliminated in the first round. So my picks for the NBA playoffs to get to the championship round, I'm picking the Boston Celtics as they have their team pretty healthy, and Tatum is back for them, who is their star player who had torn his Achilles tendon, and he's been playing well. In the Western Conference, I believe it'll come down to two teams, the Oklahoma City Thunder and the San Antonio Spurs. And even though the Thunder is a tremendous team and their team's getting healthy and they have tremendous depth on their team, I'm going to take an upset prediction and go with the San Antonio Spurs. In the NBA Finals, I think that's going to be a great shootout. But I do think that the Western representative, whether it's San Antonio or Oklahoma Thunder, will beat the Celtics in a closely contested series. If for some reason leading up to the finals, either they're different teams than I've predicted, or one of the teams has major injuries, I may change my selection. But as of now, I'm selecting the San Antonio Spurs to defeat the Boston Celtics. So that's a brief overview of sports. Last but not least in sports, the NFL draft, which is always a hugely popular event. That should be taking place in the next 2 weeks, I believe. And that's it for sports. So heading into real estate and our society discussions, let me go into a little real estate information. The first thing I'll do is go over a couple metrics that I think are interesting. As you know, I harken back about Hunters Creek a lot for a couple reasons. I do a lot of business in Hunters Creek, so I pretty much know every house for sale in Hunters Creek, and I know all the historical data. And then also, Hunters Creek is a very good barometer of the real estate market. It's a big area. There's a lot of transactions at Hunters Creek. It's been a solid community over the years in terms of it's weathered well the ups and downs of a real estate market. And it's a large community, so not that it's exactly like every other community, but you get a lot of pretty accurate metrics to correlate to how the market is going. And so far in Hunters Creek over the first 3 months of 2026, in spite of our economic erraticness, in spite of our government erraticness, in spite of the Iranian conflict, the business up to this point has pretty much mirrored 2025 in terms of the number of transactions. I would say that there's a little bit more price sensitivity. I would say you're kind of what I call your median or typically average homes. They certainly are a lot more competitive. They're on the market for longer, and in many cases, they're selling for a little bit less than they did in 2025. What I call your top-level houses, which have a lot of nice updates, they have a nice lot location, they're priced properly, those are continuing to sell quickly, and they're generating premium prices. But as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, a couple things are paramount right now. Number one, if you don't price a home properly to start with, it's going to be extremely counterproductive, probably more so than previous years, due to all the irregularities that we're facing in the marketplace. Secondly, marketing is more at a premium, really having high quality photos, giving potential buyers not only all the information they would want, but really optimal viewing conditions. So are you using professional photography? Are your pictures representative of what the house looks like? Are you providing 3D access for customers? And are you offering virtual tours? Those things have taken on more importance, I find, because by offering the quality in the marketing and the pictures of the properties, because the market's so competitive now, it's giving those homes a little bit of a competitive advantage because they get more activity as people have more information and a more realistic perspective of how that house presents itself. Secondly, effective staging. It's really important to really give some thought and get some guidance from your agent on the best way to stage a home, to maximize space, to eliminate clutter, to eliminate initial cosmetic imperfections or defects, because first impression has always been important, but in today's market and today's society, it's even more important. Last but not least, using Hunters Creek as a barometer, there are 42 homes for sale in Hunters Creek right now, and that number has stayed relatively steady since the Iranian conflict started, which has been about a month now. Prior to that, we were starting to get a weekly increase of inventory, but inventory is pretty much stabilized, I think, due to a lot of people's concerns of what exactly is going to happen to not only our economy, our real estate market, interest rates, oil prices, and how's the world going to adjust to this continued conflict. I think we'll have a better idea on the conflict in a couple weeks. Supposedly, we're negotiating a multi-level peace plan with Iran, and we'll see if something comes to fruition and the violence comes to hopefully a halt. I think one thing that's clear, we have not been getting accurate information from our government about this conflict, and I think it's clear that if we do strike an agreement, it's not going to be what everybody had hoped for. I'm sure the government's going to put a positive spin, but it's kind of obvious from if you really dig deep into this that the United States hasn't achieved its objectives. Iran has really strengthened their position, especially with the Straits of Hormuz and potential issues that are going to happen with ships going in and out of there. They've definitely used the leverage card, so I think they can always use that now because they realize that that's an effective mechanism. And they warded off the biggest superpower. We did a lot of damage to them, but we didn't put any of their programs out of commission, and they haven't had to roll over and play dead for us. I think there was a gross overestimation of the abilities for us to just devastate and pretty much make the country beg for our elimination of bombing and doing the things that happen in a war. And I think that was due in part to two things. I think our president, both himself and his advisors, for whatever reason, grossly underestimated the resolve of Iran, and also that they were going to be able to affect regime change. That was totally an unrealistic perspective. Regime change historically has never worked for us, but in Iran, we're not going to get regime change because what's happened due to the violence, we've got a more aggressive, violent leadership there, not a less violent one. So it was really a big mistake, in my opinion. Secondly, we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars in there, and our citizens are already sacrificing the United States even before this conflict occurred. Because what happened with the big, beautiful tax bill, health care benefits were cut, Medicare premiums went up, the wealthiest 1% to 5% of the people got historically large tax breaks, and the average middle-class person in the country continues to sacrifice. So I think that you can't say much positive about what is going on in that conflict so far. This just kind of proves an adage that everybody always talks about. Who you put in office really counts. And I know a lot of people feel, well, one vote, I don't have any say. Well, that's true. With one vote, you probably don't. But if thousands of people voted versus not voting, it might make a difference. I think that it's clear that this president doesn't always tell us the truth, doesn't get conflicting opinions. He just gets a bunch of yes men in there. And he significantly, in my opinion, put our country more at risk. and has created a lot of stress for our citizenry. And last but not least, has lowered the quality of life economically with people up to this point. So that's my overview of politics. And that does tie in tremendously to how people look at not only real estate, but life in general. I'm going to pivot from that a little bit and go into what I call communications. And what do I mean by pivoting, and what do I mean by communications? Well, communications is paramount in every field of life. How you communicate with your children, how you communicate with your significant other, how you communicate in a business setting, how do you communicate with customers. So everything that you do in life, communications are huge. So I'm bringing communications up more in my industry, which is real estate. And so how do I recommend communicating, and how do I personally communicate? And what are the pros and cons of my recommendations and my communication style? Well, as you may know, I've been in the real estate business for a number of years. I've owned 2 successful companies that I sold. I've managed a sales team for a number of years. I've worked with my present brokerage, which was Greater Orlando Realty, and became under the umbrella of Better Homes and Gardens about a year ago. So I've had a diverse experience level on a multitude, not only of positions, but of different ways to communicate. When you're the owner of a brokerage and you're communicating with your agents and your staff, you have to have a certain communication style. When you're overseeing a sales team, you have to have a communication style. And then when you're more of an agent, you have 2 forms of communication, of course, within your office, but more importantly, within your customer base. So I'm going to focus more today, from my standpoint, on my customer base. And what is my philosophy on my customer base? And why do I think it's hopefully very effective? And why everybody has to adopt a communication style that they're comfortable with based on their personality. But I think there's certain universal truths. And what are those universal truths? Well, number one, I believe you have to be forthright and truthful with your customers. Now, you have to combine that with diplomacy and subtlety, but I think you have to be truthful with them. And I know a lot of agents are reluctant to do that. And what do I mean by that? And can I give some examples? Well, sure. For example, you're on an appointment with a prospective seller, and you're going over a lot of information with them. And of course, what the seller wants to know usually when you're out there is 2 things. What can you sell my house for? And how much is it going to cost me to sell my house? So obviously with the cost, you should know all that, and you should be able to accurately give them figures. I always look at, when you're quoting expenses to sellers, you kind of have 2 different components. One are the real estate fees. So that would be your real estate commission that you're going to charge that seller if the house successfully sells, and other miscellaneous fees that your office may have. And then the other pot of expenses are the state fees and the lender fees, if lender fees were involved. And they're typically more on the buyer side. But your state fees would be things like stamps on the deed, owner's title insurance. If the community's in an HOA, you'll be having to pay an estoppel fee to get the HOA to give the title company information about what any buy-in fees would be for a new buyer, how much they're going to charge the seller to provide that information, and lastly, are there any violations on that property that we need to be aware of and correct before closing. So those would be your HOA fees. Stamps on the deed are one of the state of Florida's biggest revenue sources. For example, if you were selling a $500,000 house, stamps on the deed would run the seller about $3,500. So that's a big expense. The other big fee for sellers is an owner title policy. And they'll vary slightly from title company to title company, but they're pretty similar with most companies. So on a $500,000 house, an approximate title fee with all the different charges that title companies have would total around somewhere in the range of $3,700 to $3,800. So that gives you an idea of what the expenses are. So that I automatically go over that when I'm sitting in front of a seller, because they need to know what the bottom line is, so there's no surprises when you get to closing. The other piece of the puzzle with initial communications is, well, what is their house worth? And as I've mentioned, I go over a lot of factual information. I take a close look at that house. What are the pluses that house has? In other words, do they have quality improvements? How's the house been maintained by the sellers? Does the house have things that are outdated, that are going to be looked on somewhat negatively by buyers? And how do those pros and cons of their house compare to a typical house they're going to be competing with? Also, does the house have any major flaws? Like, is it a house that has pets and maybe some of the flooring is stained? Does the house have any pet odors? Does it have any extreme cooking odors due to the type of food that the owners cook? How is it staged? How much impact can you give to the sellers in modifying how their house shows and maximizing their square footage? Maybe moving some things around, maybe suggesting that they eliminate some things, because you always want to have a house shown in its most favorable light. And a couple of things to accomplish that are making sure you have as much natural light as possible in the house, and also that you don't have rooms overly furnished. So sometimes that involves consolidating pieces. Additionally, closets. Closets are crucial. Everybody that I talk to that's a prospective buyer wants a lot of closet space. Obviously, some houses have more closet space than others. Do they have a California closet system which expands the usable space in a closet? Can the owners of that house consolidate their closets? Is there any things they can throw away? Are there any things they can box up? They need to eliminate things from the floor in the closet. So the more that you can present a home in its most favorable light, a couple things are going to happen. Number one, the house is going to sell for a better price. And number two, the house is going to sell quicker. So those two things are always very important to sellers. So you need to be frank, at the same time diplomatic to sellers about those things. I know a lot of agents, because I've heard many stories about this. They overprice houses because they want to grab the listing and they don't want to worry about coming up with a price that either the seller takes negatively, or maybe other realtors will follow them in on presentations and quote a higher price, and they're fearful that the sellers will go with whoever quotes them the highest sales price. And that's always possible. There's some sellers that hear what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. However, my style is I try to be not only factual, but pretty forthright. If I think a house is going to sell for $500,000, I'm not going to tell the seller, well, let's price it at $560,000. I would be doing the seller an injustice, and I would be doing myself an injustice. So if they're expecting $560,000 and I don't feel it's worth close to $560,000, I'm not going to misrepresent to them. If they decide not to hire me because I've been, in my opinion, a lot more factual and truthful, then that's their loss and that's my loss. But I feel good at the end of the day that I've given them as much accurate insights as I can. So I always adhere to that. And I try to do it as diplomatically as I can, obviously. I don't want to get people angry at me. But I feel if you're going to deal with people, especially in today's society, you need to be truthful. I think our society, to a large degree, we're not as truthful as we used to be or we need to be. Why do I say that? Well, our political leaders, especially the ones we've had of recent times, blatantly distort and lie. And a lot of times if people repeat something that's a lie or not truthful, eventually a segment of the population believe it. So people have a credibility issue right now. They don't believe a lot of what they hear. So I'm going to be one that when I go out and talk to people, I'm going to tell them the truth. Secondly, people go on the internet a lot, and there's a lot of misinformation on the internet, a lot of distortions. AI is a double-edged sword. It does provide some useful thing, but it also provides some incorrect information. And a lot of our, what we call influencers or podcasters or whatever, they tell things that are simply not true because they're trying to create controversy. And the more clicks they can get if they're an internet influencer, or the more podcast listeners they can get, they stand the probability of becoming more popular and or making more money through their efforts. So it's not always in their best interest to tell the truth as opposed to coming up with things that are going to, really get people on edge and talking about it. So you have to kind of very, very carefully scrutinize what you hear nowadays. Secondly, my communication style is I'm going to tell more rather than less. I take the point of view that customers want to be educated. And obviously some customers have sold a lot more houses than others. But if anything, I'll probably give them more information than they want. And if they already know things, then they'll tell me, hey, I appreciate you telling me that, but I'm quite experienced, so I don't need you to repeat that information. But I want to make sure that I go over most of the situations that you can encounter once you place your house for sale. And I do the same thing to purchasers. I try to educate them on what kind of process is going to take place, negotiating strategies, how I determine what a house is worth from a buyer's standpoint, and some of the crucial factors that come into play when you're evaluating various houses. So I do the same thing. It's just I wear a different hat with buyers because obviously some of their concerns are different than sellers. I also take pride and go out of my way to regularly communicate with my customers. If anything, they might hear from me too much, but I try to make sure that I educate them fully on all the showings they've had if they're sellers, the positive and negative comments that we receive. Is there anything we can do to overcome those negative comments? If it's a buyer and they ask me for my opinion, I'm going to tell them the pros and cons of a house. If they don't ask me my opinion, I'll keep relatively quiet because my taste may be different than their taste. But I try to truthfully give my opinions whenever they're asked for. And so I feel great about the way that I interface with my customers. The one thing I want them to say at the end of their interaction with me is that they thought it was a tremendous experience. They were so impressed with not only my work ethic, but my expertise in real estate, my advice, my ongoing communications with them. I just go out of my way to do everything I can to make my customers happy. And it's a double-edged sword. Number one, it makes me feel good about what I do. Hopefully it makes my customer feel good about my do. And it's going to get me more business in the long run, because satisfied customers hopefully will refer customers to me. And fortunately, I've had a lot of referrals over the years, and I feel it's in major part to the way that I treat my customers. So that's a little bit about communications. I wish I could say that our society is working that way, but it's not. But we can change that. I think as consumers, we have to demand transparency and truthfulness. And I think as citizens, we owe it to be truthful when we're doing our day-to-day dealings, whether it's with our workplace, whether it's with our friends, whether it's with our family. And if enough people did that, our society would start to revolve and change into the society that we all hope it is, that we wouldn't have to be so skeptical of things, that we wouldn't have to be so worried about people scamming us, that we wouldn't have to be mistrustful of what we hear, because there's so many people that lie nowadays. So it all starts with each person. That trickles down to their partner, that trickles down to their kids. And how do you want your kids to act when they become adults? So I think it's incumbent on parents to put these good values in their children. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. As you know from listening to me, I give my opinions. Not everybody agrees with me, and that's okay. But to me, it's important to express myself and do it in a forthright and comprehensive manner. So I hope everybody's doing well. Please enjoy your weekend. Be safe. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And this is Marty Kaiser out.